Well, hello. Seeing as how this is a whole conference about images, I thought I'd give you a break and not present any images to you. Let me begin by pointing out that, especially in view of what happened in San Bernardino, that most police do protect us. They do save lives, they do heroic things. But I'm not going to be talking about those police today. Instead, I'm going to be talking about the small minority of police who don't save lives, but instead take lives, take innocent lives, and do many other lesser things. This probably has gone on since the beginning of history. If Neanderthals had police, they probably had similar problems. But I can give you an example of something that happened to me, an anecdotal piece of evidence. This goes back to the 1950s. One day I was standing in front of a Carvel with my friends, and a police car pulls up and asks me, for some reason, "Do you have any firecrackers, kid?" And, I knew something about the law, so I said, "Do you have a search warrant?" And that question got me shoved up against a wall and frisked, searched, the whole thing. My father was an attorney, so we went down to the local precinct, filed a complaint. Nothing happened because the cop who was called in said, "No, what are you talking about? I was a perfect gentleman. Your son is just making this up." I remember thinking that night, it's a good thing I wasn't African American. I might not even have been able to go down to the police department. So this has been going on for years. Finally, in 1991, something very significant happened. You've all heard of it. This is the videotaping of Rodney King, who's brutally beaten by police out in California. He was wanted for some kind of criminal activity, but clearly he was beaten after he had been subdued and was on the ground, beaten to within an inch of his life. What made that different is that someone in a building had a video camera. This is 1991. We don't yet have cameras in our cell phones, but there were video cameras available. Someone videotaped this. So this is something that the police could not deny happened. Charges were brought against the police officers. They were found not guilty. I'll get back to that in a second. So much, I guess, for the visual evidence. But federal charges were also brought against these police officers, and they were found guilty of violating Rodney King's civil rights. Since then, video recording technology has become much more commonplace. And there have been many examples of recorded police misconduct. I'm going to continue in a minute talking about murders that the police have done, but let me just diverge for a second and give one example of how video recording technology stopped another kind of police misconduct. This is in 2011 in the streets of New York City when the Occupy Wall Street protests were in full swing. They were not only, of course, in New York, they were across the country. The mayor of New York in those days, Bloomberg, either was ignorant of the First Amendment or didn't care about the First Amendment because he did everything he could to interfere with journalists, both professional and citizen, covering those events. And you can understand why he might have wanted to do that, seeing as how there were just a myriad of examples of police misconduct. Well, in one case, there was a gentleman by the name of Alexander Arbuckle who was covering one of the demonstrations. The cops didn't like that. They arrested him. Now, when you are arrested, there has to be some kind of charge. So the police came up with this charge that he was somehow blocking traffic, causing some kind of a raucous nuisance. And that's what he was charged with. The case went to trial. Fortunately for Mr. Arbuckle and for our society, there was another citizen journalist by the name of Tim Poole who had videotaped the whole event. And the jury, seeing that evidence, found Mr. Arbuckle not guilty. So that is one outstanding example of how video evidence can lead to justice. In other cases, though, we haven't had such good results. And I could talk to you for like 5 hours, and you've heard these names. You can look them up on Wikipedia. But you've heard the name of Errol Gardner. He's choked to death on the streets of New York. There are videotapes of that. The officer was not even brought to trial. There's Michael Brown, who is basically shot to death in Ferguson, Missouri. That's on videotape. He wasn't even indicted. But there are some positive developments. One of the issues here is the culture that we come from, in which prosecutors and even a large number of people in the public at large are inclined to think that police don't do these things. And so when these people are brought to trial, they're found not guilty, a prosecutor doesn't even want to bring them to trial, and so forth. And as I said, this goes back hundreds of years and even longer than that. But slowly, slowly, there seem to be some positive developments. In Baltimore, there a person in police custody wound up dead. There's not all that much video evidence of what actually happened, but there's some here and there. And there the prosecutor is bringing the police officer to justice. Now, one of the things that's really crucial in looking at these revolutionary developments is who took the video recording, who made this video record. A lot of has been said about police body cameras, and certainly police body cameras are better than no video evidence. But it's important to bear in mind, I think, that police body cameras produce videos that are in the hands of the police. And when I was preparing this talk a couple of months ago, I was going to make the theoretical point that a police body cam video is intrinsically, ipso facto, not as reliable a witness to reality as a camera in a smartphone, simply because, well, what's the history of official recordings? You've all heard of Nixon's 18-minute tape gap in the Watergate tapes. Well, fortunately for my presentation, unfortunately for much more profound reasons, a case just became very public in the past week or two, the case of Laquan McDonald in Chicago. I'm sure many of you have heard of that case. A police chief resigned as a result of the police misconduct, the police murder in that case, and the fact that it took a year for the tape from a police body cam to even become public. Not only that, there is silence on the police body cam. Again, reminiscent of the silence in the Nixon tapes. Now, as I'm sure you all know, the normal way that any video camera records is with sound. The only reason you don't have sound is if, okay, maybe the camera is malfunctioning. That's an interesting coincidence, isn't it, that with this sensitive tape that the police took a year to release to the public, it would be an interesting coincidence, wouldn't it, that somehow the video recording equipment malfunctioned. A far more plausible explanation is that the police didn't like what they heard on that video, so they erased it. Just like Nixon's secretary, or whoever it was, cut out those missing 18 minutes in the White House tapes. So body cams are not, I think, the ultimate answer. Even so, you have a lot of pushback. There are some police who are saying this is not a good idea. It's inhibiting police from doing their job. To which I say, if it inhibits police from doing their job, and these police think that their job is murdering innocent people and beating them to within an inch of their life, good. I hope it does inhibit police. But in the end, I think we as a society in a democracy have to rely on ourselves. And I think the most hopeful development that's come along on this issue is the ubiquity of the video camera in the phones that all of us carry. And I think it's going to take a while. You're going to find police who are caught on video cameras murdering people, not charged, or charged and found not guilty, but I'm hopeful. To paraphrase Martin Luther King Jr., that through cameras and video phones, the arc of justice is slowly turning towards justice. Thank you.